Hey, good morning. Welcome to week 2 of business law. I know you're all excited to get week 1 out of the way, and we're down to 14 weeks. Well, plus finals, of course, but it goes by so darn fast. I mean, just to think, last week we had 15 weeks left, and we're already down to 14. So we are cruising along. So, yeah, let me jump in first and talk about the discussions a bit. Okay. Um, we've got a few of them going, and some of you have jumped ahead, and that's wonderful, right? Okay, and I'll repeat a few of the things that I said in the email that I sent. That when it's your group's turn, you're required to engage in the discussion for that particular week, right? In that particular subject matter. If it's not your group's turn, feel free to jump in. Okay, feel free to read those. Feel free to engage in it. Feel free to enjoy it. I mean, there's some interesting stuff sometimes that happens in some of these. Grading on these, of course, is going to be based on, I think I've got a little rubric, and that rubric was for a different discussion that I had, so I have to actually go and look at it and make sure that it fits this one as well. But your grading on this is going to be kind of both quantity and quality. And by that I mean if you have a number of small posts that contribute to the discussion, the length maybe doesn't matter as long as they're of relative high quality and contribute to the discussion. That can be good. I've had students in the past, though, that might submit one discussion item, but it's extremely well written and it's extremely to the point, and it really covers the subject well and does those types of things. That can be worthy of a good grade as well. And so I'm not simply going to look at the number of posts that somebody submits. I'm going to try to go through those and kind of assign values. And sorry, but some of that's a bit subjective, based on how I feel you responded, or how I feel, or how much quality I feel you put in, or time or effort that you put in to your particular post. So if you want to make good posts, do a little research on the subject. People that jump in and just say, I agree, that person was an idiot. That's not going to be worth much, right? Folks that do a little research on the subject or contribute perhaps some personal knowledge or different things like that that really contribute to the discussion, those are going to be good things. And I'll call out a good one. I think it was on the roof one. And I'll do a positive call out here. I think it was Sarah had posted just recently. Sarah, about the wrong roof deal, and gave some real insight. Okay, and maybe has some personal knowledge. I don't know, and I don't necessarily want to know. Sometimes I don't want to get into people's personal involvement in some of those things, but maybe had some personal insight, and so it was a compelling post. It made me think perhaps differently than I had been thinking, and those are huge positives. Those are things that I like to look at, and not to say that I want you to disagree with somebody's position, because agree or disagree, what I want is some support for your position. Okay, whether that's logic or whether that's research or whatever it may be, give some support for your position, as opposed to maybe just expressing your opinion, although I do want to hear your opinion. Okay, and maybe I'm getting you even more confused than you were when I started. So yeah, express your opinion, okay, and then back it up if you can. Okay. Please remember to submit ideas too. I'd like you guys to submit ideas, some subject things, because I'd like them to be from you that we could use for future discussions. We kind of got through September handled, right? But we've got a couple months after that where we're still going to have discussions, and if you guys can come up with some good ideas, that's what I'll throw into the discussions. Number one. Number two might qualify you for some extra credit. Now, on the downside, I had I forget which discussion it was. I think it was this one, September 14th. I was talking about the NLRB ruling that affects franchises, and I read back through that, and the ruling, by the way, basically says, and maybe this is an oversimplification, that franchisors like McDonald's or Yum Brands, which is Pizza Hut and Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken, franchisors can be held responsible for the employment practices of the franchisees. Okay, that's a 180-degree turnabout from what we have been practicing for the last God knows how long. Okay, it not only affects franchisors and franchisees. I was listening to the financial news, and it also affects contractors and subcontractors. So, which is a very, 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 very common practice, right? Where a general contractor might get the bid to build a house, build a road, build a commercial building, whatever the case may be, and often many of those jobs are subcontracted out, and this ruling may say that general contractor may be responsible for the employment practices of one of the subcontractors or all of the subcontractors. Okay, it's a profound shift. It's kind of earth-shaking. Now, it's still going to be subject to some appeals outside of the administrative agency, and administrative agencies are down the line. If you want a little background on this, you might want to leap forward to it's chapter 12 or 13, 14, somewhere in that neighborhood, and look through that chapter on administrative agencies, because that's what the NLRB is. There is recourse outside of the agency, and that recourse is being pursued. Okay, I think it will be interesting to see if the courts will uphold the agency's ruling. This one's kind of earth-shaking, I think, and I'm sure most of you found this was a blip. Probably didn't even see the headline. Probably didn't. If you saw the headline, probably didn't really have a clue what it meant. But it could have a profound impact on how business is done in the United States going into the future. Although I think it'll still be sorted out, and it may not have the same. The ruling may not stand. So. What the negative was on this is that as I started reading through it, those who had submitted got into a very interesting discussion, but it was about the minimum wage. And the minimum wage is a separate issue. I would love to have a discussion. I'd love to teach a class on the minimum wage, because I could talk about that for a whole semester, and maybe pros and cons of implementing higher minimum wages. But that's kind of an economics discussion, although it's a legal discussion too. I don't question that, as long as we talked about the legal aspects of it and imposing it and those types of things. But it's really different from the topic. Okay, so be careful as you're commenting or adding to these discussions that you kind of stay on topic. That you go back and look at it. That's not to say, and again I'll add some confusion to this, but that's not to say that we're not going to get some other legal issues, okay, that may come out of, right, your discussion or your research or your personal interest in a subject, and that's fine. Either one, create another thread and indicate that it's maybe a little bit of an aside but worth discussing, or send that to me as another complete separate issue that we might add for a later discussion. Okay, so there it is. Scoring on these, I'll try to, when the week one is done, I'll try to get through and start doing a little bit of scoring. So those of you that participated in that, will have an idea. I'll try to give a little, without naming names and doing those types of things. I'll try to give a little general feedback, right, so that everybody in the other groups, really has an idea where we're going. Group one, sorry, you guys are kind of guinea pigs, right? But I'll take that into consideration, as I grade. And group two, even to a certain extent, you guys are guinea pigs, right? As we move along through the semester, I'll expect no more guinea pigs, right? Hopefully we'll get a better idea of what we want to do. So, okay, chapter 2, there we go. We're on to chapter 2, and guess what? We're going to have a test also that's going to be due Monday. Okay, so as a reminder, we'll have a test that's going to be coming up Monday, and I'll get that. The test is already there. Okay, And I think I'll have to check. It may not be opened yet. I may have it linked, but I don't know that I have it open. But I'll try to open it after my lecture today, so that you guys that are early birds can get in and take the test if you would like. There will be time limits on the test. Okay, so be prepared for the test. You know, the quizzes, I don't know if they have time limits. I don't remember if they are. They're probably lengthy, and you still have time to look things up, and that's fine. That's the intent of the quizzes. But the test will have a 50-minute time limit, so be prepared for the test, because you won't have time to look everything up and make your answers. You're going to have to be prepared to answer those questions. So, okay. So chapter 2, we're going to talk about ethics and you know, the ethical basis of laws, and etc., etc. Put some comics in. It gives me a chance to have a drink of coffee before we carry on, right? Introduction, right? Kind of talking about, you know, today's world, that maybe we suffer from a loss of moral sense. You know, that are we entering a world where right and wrong are less important? Is that a good way to put it? I don't know. Oliver Wendell Holmes, on the other hand, said years ago, you know, the law is the witness and external deposit, right, of our moral life. So morals go into laws, right? I've often heard you can't legislate morality, but that's bunk, because, you know, stealing is a moral issue, right? And most of us believe that stealing is wrong, and thus we legislate it, right? And we enforce it, okay? And we do with a lot of our morals. And so morals are often legislated and often become laws, right? Okay, so there's a connection, but there's a disconnect too in certain areas, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So what's happening? Well, in our society, you know, we have what this is talking about when it says public education and family structure is that often, and maybe it's because of two working parents and those types of things, we've kind of deferred, or we've kind of given the over to the public schools the raising of our children. And I don't say that by we as meaning you and I, or any of those things, or your parents or my parents, but in a sense, we've done that to a large degree, where a lot of things that took place, you know, the trainings and teachings and those types of things in the family setting, we've kind of deferred or given over to public education, right? That's not necessarily good. There's a lot of economic interdependence, okay, and both internationally and intranationally, right? We are just interdependent, where, you know, we used to have our own family farm, right? And you raised all your own food and did all those types of things, and nobody does that anymore, almost nobody. And so we're dependent on each other for the production, and those are good because they make our economy efficient and those types of things. But it kind of changes our moral and our who we engage with. You know, we used to engage with our family, right? Because we were busy making a living and doing those types of things. Now we engage with lots of other people, and we do that through news media, the internet, and this is probably old, even though it's only a year or so old, but social media, right? Social media becoming a huge thing. I always get a kick, since we're talking about ethics, I can throw this out, but growing up, I remember so often hearing from kids, fellow friends, whatever, saying, God, I can't wait to get out of this little town because everybody knows what you're doing. They always know what you're up to, and I can't stand that. And now we have Facebook, and everybody just posts what they're doing. So, I don't know, we've kind of gone full circle there. We're kind of gone from people, you know, wanting to have the privacy and whatnot, to people just fully exposing everything about their lives for everybody to see, right? You know, a little stat there about insider trading and those types of things. You know, one thing I want to point out, in the news media, oftentimes it makes it look like our society too is really in a downfall. Most of us would think that we're in an era of horrible terrorism, war, people dying in mass assaults, and all those other things. And nothing could be further from the truth. We're living in the safest time ever for mankind in terms of percentages of people affected by those types of violence. It's absolutely by far the safest period of time. Okay, but we read about abductions of kids and those types of things, and we're horror stricken, and yet those incidents are way down from what they were 30, 40, 50 years ago as a percentage. Okay. SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, we talk a little bit more about that, but some of the investigations that have been big news, and these are a couple of years old, which by today's standards, probably not something you guys have seen in the news because you wouldn't have been paying attention to those things when you were in junior high or high school. But Bernie Madoff, names you could look up, Alan Stanford, Raj Ratnam. That one was kind of an interesting case, and I don't want to get into at length what it was about, but I found that one kind of interesting. So. Dang, lots of coffee. Oh, even more coffee there. So there we go, right? Enron. And Enron happened, 12, 13, 14 years ago, but just a huge ethical, moral, you could call it, scandal that possibly involved people in government. That's supposed to be Dick Cheney. I forget who that one is. But it was a huge scandal. It was a company that ended up going broke because of some inappropriate accounting and etc. And now it's 10, 12 years old. But we have Sarbanes-Oxley, which I think there's a full chapter, at least a good part of a chapter, devoted to Sarbanes-Oxley, right, that came out of the Enron scandal. So we'll talk about that. Contemporary business ethics, right? Ethics in society. Societies become more diverse. Right? We don't have the shared values. We often say that the United States is a Judeo-Christian type of a background, but that's that's changing, certainly. Okay, that's changing. That we're far more diverse than that. There's far more agnostics, atheists, and other religions that have entered into our society and made it more diverse. Right? Decline in public education, and certainly there's not a decline in public education in terms of how it's offered and dollars and those types of things, but family structure, I think it's more that there's a deferment of family to public education. The interdependence in the news media, social media, I would throw in there. Okay, and government, right? Government can step in. So when we had the Enron, we had Sarbanes-Oxley, right? When we had the financial real estate bubble and whatnot in 2007 and the meltdown there, we ended up with Dodd-Frank, right? So government steps in and we have more regulation, right? Because of those things. We like to think that we can self-regulate, and in a lot of cases those have been successful through the years. Different industries and whatnot do a lot of self-regulation, but it's difficult. And whenever a bubble happens, government tends to step in. Paul Harvey said self-government won't work without self-discipline, and how true he was. For you that are too young, which is probably all of you, you didn't get to listen to Paul Harvey, and for that I'm sorry for you. There was an ad in the Super Bowl here a year or two ago, and it featured Paul Harvey talking about, so God made a farmer. If you want to listen to one that's very compelling of Paul Harvey, that's a good one to listen to. You could Google it and find it. But listening to some of the other Paul Harvey stuff is pretty cool. Look at that. 2009, not that long ago, 49% of employees surveyed reported observing ethical misconduct. Now, that could be huge ranges, right? That could be the person that takes home the company pen, or the company notepad or something, right, to use at home, but it could be far greater than that. And but ethical misconduct is ethical misconduct, and maybe the person that takes home the pen or the writing pad, might be the same person that would do worse things, if in fact they're not supposed to do those things. So morality, right? It's values that guide our behavior, right versus wrong. When we share moral values, we get a little more social cooperation. And again, our values are diverging. here in the U.S., right? Businesses have to be sensitive, okay? Probably no greater debate, and here might be an interesting discussion topic. Yeah, no greater debate going on than the newness of the same-sex marriage issue and how that affects businesses. Again, I wouldn't be interested in an argument about the morals or those types of things with same-sex marriage, but I might be interested in a discussion about how that affects businesses and their decision or choices, right, to make or to do business with, same-sex couples, whatever the case may be, right? And of course, businesses sometimes have their own values and morals, right? Rules of conduct are instituted by the state, so we take some of these, and again, the same-sex issue, which up until 3, 4, 5 years ago, in fact, up until just a few months ago, there were no protections for sexual orientation in the state of Montana. None. Okay, no legal protections in the workplace, I should say, okay, for people of the same sex that were married or had same-sex relations, right? So, boy, we've come a long ways in just a few months. So, okay, law, it is an external motivator, right? So it's beyond our morals and our ethics and those types of things. It motivates us externally. It can set some minimum standards. So, and I got to pause for a second. Yeah, law set minimum standards. We like to think, of course, that we would act perhaps even with higher standards than what the law set, right? A couple systems, they say, of ethics: formalism, absolute morality, right? I think it's called the Kant imperative, perhaps, that we shouldn't act, or the Kant's categorical imperative, maybe. We should act only in ways that we would want others to act, all others, right? And if we can't accept that others would act in that way, then should we? Okay. And sometimes formalism is also known as deontology, right? Consequentialism is more concerned with the end result, maybe, okay? And yet it kind of has a Protestant, we might say that perhaps this is a little more old-fashioned religion and the Protestant ethic, the work ethic and those types of things, that the end result might justify some straying from actual formal types of things. So what would be an example of that? Would you break the law, for example, or would you do something unethical if it led to good for a great number of people? Yeah, the answer to that may be yeah. I guess I often use as an example, I like to ski, and I'm on the ski patrol, and our ski hill's 29 miles, south of Havre, and if my son, say, got hurt badly while we were out there, okay, while it might be a little bit unethical, and it would certainly be a violation of the law, would I speed driving him home to get him to the doctor to try to ensure his safety, even though I might be risking to some extent the lives of others? I would, right, I absolutely would. And so because in my mind the end result, that would be more of a consequentialist. The two aren't necessarily you don't necessarily have to be one or the other, right? They can combine, and it might go with with what's going on or what particular issue you're faced with, right? Just kind of we might get to the same resolution depending on how we come into those types of things. So philosophers called the end result of the ethical examination the good, the bad, the ugly, or the rule of law, right? And it's we call that the good. Is there a relationship between law and ethics? Absolutely. Okay, but are they exact? No, absolutely not. Okay, sources of values can come from legal, professional codes of ethics, things like you know, the American Bar Association for lawyers, although ethics and lawyers is kind of an oxymoron, but organizational codes of ethics. So, you know, where you work, right? If you're involved in an organization, there might be certain codes of ethics that that organization might have, right? And ultimately, individual values. And ultimately, this is the main source, right? The main value source for our ethics, business ethics or otherwise, come from our own individual values. Ethical rules drawn from the law, right? We believe in liberty and rights, and this is the law, the U.S. law, right? But we also believe, and when we get talking about tort, you know, we'll talk a lot about good faith. You know, that we have a responsibility to act in good faith. We have a responsibility to act with due care, and something that's becoming seemingly more and more important is confidentiality. Right, so you know, HIPAA, for example, which is a healthcare provider's law, you know, deals with confidentiality and what we can disclose and what we can't disclose. Okay, and then conflicts of interest too. We're required each year up here to sign a conflicts of interest statement, and I don't know, as a faculty member, you know, that I would be involved in things that where there might be a conflict of interest. You know, some simple things though, and this one's fairly minor, but recently I was on the Founders Excellence Committee, you know, for the foundation here, and we were awarding Hall of Fame nominees and also Founders Excellence Awards, 2 of each, right? Well, one of the Hall of Fame awardees happened to be my cousin. Well, that might have been a conflict of interest voting on that, right? And I abstained from the voting on that, although I didn't abstain from, you know, kind of expressing my opinion and those types of things. And, you know, these aren't, there's no value, right, in terms of monetary value or any of those things. And so I don't think I was, even had I voted, I don't think I'd have been stepping over the ethical line. And one of the Foundation Excellence Awards winners, 2 of them actually, were pretty good friends of mine too. And so, but you know, it's probably the case when you've lived in this town your whole life, and people that have been involved in the college you've known pretty well, right? So professional codes of ethics I'm sorry, I should back up and say, so the conflicts of interest would be more if I was serving on a committee, maybe, for example, the committee formed to help with the new building that's going on here, and if you were awarding contracts, I would need to disclose if I had a professional or a personal interest with any of the companies that had bid, right, put in bids for the contract. I would definitely need to disclose that, and I might have to excuse myself if that were the case, or if I were on a search committee and I had an interest or personal or otherwise business with one of the applicants, right, I'd probably need to disclose that too. So professional codes of ethics based on historic and tradition, right? They are self-regulated. And here's some examples. Should know some examples, right? Organizational codes of ethics sometimes come when there's a lack of industry codes. And some industries have well-established organizations themselves, and they do set up codes, like the Bar Association with lawyers or like the accountants. Okay, other industries may not have those types of codes, right? So we would set those things up within our own businesses or organizations. Okay, and in order to self-regulate within our business, it does take these things. It takes enthusiasm, it takes commitment. It takes commitment from the top down. You know, if your top guy isn't acting in an ethical manner, you can't expect the employees to. Okay, so it takes a huge commitment, and we do have to provide for sanctions if those things are violated. Okay, individual values, right? What should we do? Have I thought if the action is right or wrong? Am I going to be proud? Am I willing for everyone to act like me? Will my decision cause harm, and will my actions violate the law? The toughest thing I would say about ethics that I found in business, and even to a certain extent here, is that you will be faced with in your business life, and I hate to break this to you, but you'll be faced with ethical dilemmas that are not of your own making. Okay, They just come up, and and you're going to be stuck, and you're going to have to be maybe the person that has to deal with it in some fashion or another. One of the stories I tell is I'm working at the bank, and one of my customers was getting scammed, and I knew that, and this customer was coming in and talking to me practically daily, okay, and taking money out of his savings account and those things out of the bank that was his money, and he was entitled to do with what he wanted, but I knew he was being scammed, okay. Go back to the confidentiality thing, and even back then confidentiality was an issue, and as it is today, and so you know, what do? Do you break the law in that case and disclose to perhaps law enforcement people that there's a scam taking place? You know, do you just ignore it because that's the legal thing to do, really? You know, or what do you do? And keep in mind that those ethical dilemmas came long after the conversation had taken place with the fella that you know, hey, I know you're getting scammed, I know you're getting screwed, I know somebody's taking advantage of you, we need to put a stop to this, is there anything I can do, how can I help you, can I call people? You know, that conversation had already taken place, and you know, his answer was you know, no, I'll take care of it. And so what do you do? And the guy was an older, you know, he was an older gentleman, and so it was a really difficult case. And you know, the end, I'll tell you, is ultimately the guy was deprived of basically all his savings, and he and another old fella who was drawn in to the scam, they both lost a lot of their savings, and it was only after one of them died, and the kids. His kids, the one that died, his kids sued the other fella, not because they wanted money, but they knew that suing him was the only way it was going to bring to light the scam. The two people that perpetrated the scam ultimately were found guilty of illegally taking advantage of old folks. Probably a more legal term for that, but scamming some old folks, and they did spend time in prison. I saw just a year or so ago that one of them was up for parole. I think it was denied, thank God. Obstacles, right? We get an emphasis on profit, especially on short-term profits. You know, we're required to report quarterly, and by God, if you miss your numbers, you know, you as the head, you might be in trouble, right? And so, you know, do you bend the rules? Yeah, you know, it happens. Should you know? But does it happen? Yeah. Effective group, right? So you know, Facebook, well, you know, Mark Zuckerberg's the face of Facebook. It's owned by a gazillion people, right, that all have stock in Facebook, and so there may be less individual responsibility. Facebook's probably not a great example because it's fairly new, and like I say, Zuckerberg has a decent amount of control. But take an older company like Johnson & Johnson, right, or something like that, right? Non-owner control of resources, and that's kind of what we're talking about, right? That you have managers and CEOs and those types of folks that control the resources, and yet they're, you know, and while they may be small shareholders, they're not big shareholders, right? Steps to promote business ethics, right? Got to involve top management, absolutely. Got to be open, got to be consideration. You need to establish a framework where the people, your subordinates, feel comfortable coming and talking to you about those ethical dilemmas. You know, and I didn't have any problems, you know, talking to my superiors or other subordinates or whatever when I was faced with my ethical dilemma, right? You know, run it by them, see what they think, and see what their answers are, and you know, sometimes they can give you good direction, sometimes all they can do is shrug their shoulders and say, you know, sorry, this one's on you, buddy. Okay, and so those things do happen, right? But if you're open about it and talking to them about it, at least you're getting input, one, and you're letting them know what the dilemma is that you're faced with. So the stakeholder theory says that there's lots of other people involved, you know, besides just the shareholders. Okay, there's stakeholders, which can be the employees, it can be suppliers, it can be all types of things, right? The stakeholder says that we take all those things, it might be the community where we're doing business, and we take all those things into consideration as we are running our business. And this says that business ethics can contribute to long-term profitability, and I definitely agree with that. I think that we admire, over time, we admire those businesses that display a high degree of business ethics, and they get rewarded over time, right? Think of the companies that don't display high degrees of ethics, and we might just kind of turn and go, I don't know, right? So ethics can be a business asset, certainly, right? And they have to be sensitive, right? Business community has to be sensitive to society's changes because, like we said, look at the changes in terms of same-sex marriage that have happened just in the last year or so. Huge, right? And business community might need to be sensitive to those things, right? And ethics can certainly be a leadership issue. So what about property? We live in a in a property society, which we take for granted. We grew up in this, and we assume that it's something that's enjoyed every place, and certain property rights are probably enjoyed every place, even in Cuba. They might have the right to own their own car, bike, or whatever. But those property rights are extreme, I would almost say, here in the U.S., right? But the criticism is that some people end up with way more. Warren Buffett's worth $70 billion, although the stock market down the last few weeks, he's probably only worth $60 million, as is Bill Gates, okay? And yet we have lots of people starving, okay? And is that right that he should have that kind of success while people are starving, okay? Yeah, great argument. Again, we might have some great economic arguments, but support, however, is this. The other side of that is that there's less wastefulness. Warren Buffett's a damn good allocator of capital, okay? And really, he doesn't waste it on a lot of things. He puts his money to work, and so the billions that he's worth are helping to employ hundreds of thousands of people and making products and providing services and helping to control costs and those types of things for consumers, employees, et cetera, et cetera. It's, and so it maximizes wealth. And I can tell you that without question, the nations that have the better property rights are the nations where the poorest people live the best. Okay, I was reading something just yesterday, the day before, that poor people in the United States have more living space on average than do middle-class people in Europe. Our poor people live in 800 or 1,000 square feet, might be the size of a typical apartment, and that's the same size as a middle-class person's abode or a home or apartment in Europe. Okay. And so, this idea of property, being somehow unjust, again, we could have good arguments about that. Okay, property, underlying values are moral ones. Yeah, property provides ordering of relationships between people. Yeah, absolutely. And then people, some people are indifferent to property. Good for them, right? But on the other hand, other people are they're proud of it, and they like to promote and enhance and build wealth through the accumulation of property and whatnot. And there's nothing necessarily morally or unethical about that, in my opinion, anyhow. Yeah, who would want to treat mosquitoes ethically? Although, I try to kill them with one swat, okay, so that it's maybe less painful. I don't know, but mosquitoes only live like a day or two anyhow, and so I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. Sorry, I used to, but I've gotten a little more cynical about mosquitoes as I've gotten older. Yeah, this was one, again, it was quite a while ago, but it was an interesting case, Vioxx and Celebrex. Celebrex, I think, is still on the market, but Vioxx got pulled. What they found is a lot of people with especially rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, lots of pain, right? And these two drugs both delivered relief from that pain, and Vioxx was pretty effective at it. It delivered a lot of relief for the pain that people felt. However, there was an increase in the risk of heart failure. Now, they found that out, and of course the company got sued, and they had to pay out a bunch of money to, class action lawsuit for people who had lost loved ones and whatnot. Okay, and then the drug got pulled from the market. Okay, in spite of the fact that many of the folks that had those conditions, that had the osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, they testified to Congress that they were more than willing to take the risk, that the drugs provided them relief where they could enjoy life, and they felt that that enjoyment was worth the risk that they might get. Congress, FDA, said no, we're still going to pull it. Okay, so interesting dilemma, right? And what about the company? I mean, could you build a disclosure big enough that said, here you might die if you take this pill, but it's kind of up to you. I don't know if you could. So, kind of, can an act be ethical but not legal? And that's kind of an opinion one. I would argue yes. Lanny would argue no. Is it ethical to put animals at risk to test drug safety? I think most of us would probably agree. Probably most of us from Montana would say that if it's a life-threatening thing, absolutely. If we're testing Botox, to see if it makes your lips look better or something, yeah, let the poor critters live, right? But for life-saving treatments and stuff, yeah, absolutely. So there we go. That's the end of chapter 2. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you're successful at the quizzes and whatnot. And remember that you have a test due by Monday. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next week.